The year's 1864, and amidst a raging U.S. Civil War, Salmon Chase is about to run for president, backstabbing his own party mate, the current president, Abraham Lincoln. Chase was using his position as Secretary of the Treasury to build a secret society meant to blindside Lincoln, and it seemed that Chase had a real chance of succeeding. Republicans respected him, he was well connected with bankers and businessmen, and what's more, Salmon Chase, as you'll learn today, had just successfully financed the war through the creation of the U.S.'s first national currency. Now, Chase may have been a genius, but he wasn't immune to pressure, and his work as the Secretary of the Treasury didn't come naturally to him. Chase was as inexperienced as he was ambitious, but the urgency of the Civil War required visionary decision-making. Chase responded to the pressure of the moment with his most notable contribution to the U.S. banking system, the Legal Tender Act of 1862, the law that was about to establish America's first federal currency. Before this, transactions in America were a bit of a mess. People were using gold, silver, state-issued currencies, and even foreign currencies. This lent itself to a world of financial confusions, not to mention inefficiencies that were just hindering the U.S.'s economic growth. It also wasn't going to be a very viable solution to finance this super expensive war. And so, through the Legal Tender Act, Chase created the greenbacks. The very first federal paper currency, greenbacks were the predecessor to the modern U.S. dollar. Chase even came up with the timeless slogan, "In God We Trust," to be included on the banknotes, and it was going to take a whole lot of trust in God for this to successfully pan out, as the greenbacks, to the shock of many, were not supported by gold or silver, but instead the credit of the federal government. Chase had sold federal bonds to wealthy financiers, ensuring that the value of greenbacks in the open market was now backed by government bonds. A government bond is a type of debt-based investment where you loan money to a government in return for an agreed rate of interest. Governments will often use bonds to raise funds for infrastructure projects, and investors can use them to get a set return paid at regular intervals. In our story, the bonds were being issued to raise a war chest large enough to decide the outcome of the Civil War. The only two viable purchasers of these bonds could have been European powers or wealthy Northerners. The European investors were reluctant, to say the least, as they were essentially investing in the outcome of a pretty speculative war. Motivated by the dire circumstances, a persistent Chase sent representatives to Europe to negotiate the sale of the bonds. While this did help raise some money, Europe, for the most part, wanted nothing to do with the U.S. Civil War. Luckily, Chase's domestic efforts were more successful. He developed strong personal relationships with the heads of America's banks, and he assured them that he would enact whatever fiscal policy he needed to ensure that the bonds were an attractive offer. Chase was ultimately able to bolster the confidence of both the greenbacks and government bonds, and he achieved this through two pivotal strategies. The first was an unprecedented marketing campaign encouraging ordinary citizens to participate in the patriotic act of purchasing bonds. The second was a taxation policy on other currencies, ingeniously heightening the demand for greenbacks. Chase had now united the North under one currency, and in doing so effectively printed nearly $500 million, doubling the nation's money supply. But Chase's genius didn't stop with mere economics. He wove his political ambitions into the very fabric of the currency itself. He had put himself on the $1 bill and Lincoln on the $10 bill. When asked what his justification was, he said it would be improper for him to appear on a higher denomination bill than the president. But beneath his modest facade laid his true intentions. To be the face of the most widely circulated bill, Chase's new banking system didn't just unite the North or double the money supply, it was also a stage upon which he positioned himself for maximum visibility. His imprint on the $1 bill was more than a financial act. It was Chase setting up for his presidential campaign. He was coming to take Lincoln out of the White House. Now, Chase's beef with Lincoln was not over policies, but politics. Chase was jealous of Lincoln, thought more of himself, and was obsessed with becoming the president. This motivated Chase to be uncompromising over petty disputes, like his official appointments and the company he kept. Chase would get so heated during some of these disputes that he'd constantly threaten his resignation, something that a very patient Lincoln found irritable but still put up with because he needed Chase. One time, in 1863, Chase appointed his pal Victor Smith to an official role within the Treasury, and outrage erupted because the public found out that Chase owed Victor money. Now, while there was never any evidence to collusion or corruption behind the appointment, gossip was enough for Lincoln to make up his mind, and Lincoln fired Victor when Chase was away. Chase responded in a fit of rage and submitted his resignation to Lincoln. Now, Chase had pulled this trick in the past, and Lincoln simply ignored the letters, but this time was different. As legend has it, Lincoln felt the matter to be so serious that he took the letter, went to Chase's home himself, put his arms around Chase's neck, and said, "Chase, here is a paper with which I wish to have nothing to do. Take it back and be reasonable." Lincoln then left and never heard of that resignation again. But while Lincoln's stature may have been grand enough to put out the fire of Chase's temperament, it could not put out the fire of Chase's ambition. And as 1864 approached, so did the pace of Chase's efforts to position himself to succeed President Lincoln. Since early 1862, Chase had been building an organization of loyal supporters. Now, Chase denied that he had ever used his position to further his political ambitions. He once wrote, "I should despise myself if I ever felt capable of appointing or removing a man for the sake of the presidency." Yet, his appointments revealed a bit of a different story. On March 5th, 1864, George Dennison, a bureaucrat Chase had appointed, wrote in a letter, "We're forming a chase club here and meet for our organization next Monday. It will comprise of some of the best men of the city of different interests, political affinities, and I believe we can control the election of delegates to the National Convention." So while Chase was juggling his ingenious innovations with his conniving political endeavors, the South was just imploding. As war raged on, the drama unfolding amidst banks was as pivotal as most battlefields. The Confederate government, in its desperation, turned to a policy of prolific currency issuance, aka money printing, excessive money printing. 60% of the capital that the South used to finance the war, they actually just printed. They just printed it. And the implications of this meant an extraordinary expansion of the South's money supply. A 20-fold expansion. So the South have now just 20x their money supply and are experiencing the economic nightmare that is hyperinflation. In economics, hyperinflation refers to a situation of rapid inflation, where the prices of goods and services rise uncontrollably over defined periods of time, eroding the real value of the local currency. By 1865, the Confederate dollar was but a shadow of its former self. What cost a single dollar in 1861 required $92 at the end of the war. The South's economic foundation crumbled as property values plummeted and the population dwindled due to the casualties and disease. In fact, more Confederate soldiers actually died of disease than on the battlefields, as a once thriving economy was now reduced to a barter economy, a tragic regression underlining the failure of the Confederate financial system. The once wealthy South was now a region in ruin, and even though the Union territories remained relatively unscathed, the Confederate states were marred by destruction, neglect, and resource depletion. In our last episode, we established the economic circumstances that set up the war and the debate around slavery, and in this episode, we see how different degrees of financial ingenuity set apart the rebellions who got wiped out and the leaders who went on to rule America. The 1864 election was a major flashpoint in the Civil War, as it threatened to damage the Republican Party. Chase had the support of his secret society, the Chase Club, which consisted of some of America's most elite politicians, bankers, and manufacturers. But despite this, Chase's campaign would come to the surprise of many, and was certainly audacious as a reflection of party divisiveness during a war that was meant to bring the country together. Chase aligned himself with abolitionists who wanted an even more anti-slavery stance than Lincoln, who was at that time the leader of the abolitionist movement. This naturally kind of confused some people, but nevertheless, Chase positioned himself as an alternative to Lincoln. And what's more, an alternative that understood the financial landscape that the fragile US economy was going to have to navigate after the war. Now, while this did surprise some Republicans, it didn't surprise Lincoln, who in fact knew about Chase's presidential ambitions all along, but did nothing to discourage Chase. Lincoln truly was a stoic leader, less concerned with Chase in the election and more concerned with the Civil War. Early in 1864, with the war dragging on and Lincoln's popularity in decline, Chase's bid seemed like a real possibility. His support among radicals was substantial, and there was growing discontent with Lincoln's leadership. Lincoln found all of this rather frustrating, and soon tensions boiled over into a scandal. The Pomeroy Circular, a secret pamphlet circulated by Chase's supporters that openly promoted Chase and criticized Lincoln. When this circular became public, it not only strained Lincoln and Chase's relationship, but also embarrassed Chase, as this was very unprofessional of someone in his position and stature. Yet, the competition remained close, and the Republican Party was deeply divided. Lincoln, however, was not to be outmaneuvered. Recognizing the delicate balance within his party, he made key concessions to the radicals, consolidating support and ensuring the nomination of Andrew Johnson, a war Democrat, as his vice president. This strategic move helped to bridge divisions within the party and strengthen Lincoln's candidacy. Meanwhile, Chase's repeated offers of resignation, previously refused by Lincoln, were finally accepted after the Pomeroy Circular. Public perception on this political drama was mixed. Chase's financial skills were widely admired, but his political ambition was seen by some as inappropriate during such a fraught period in the nation's history. Lincoln's strategic moves were viewed by many as evidence of his political wisdom, though others remained critical of his wartime leadership. Ultimately, Lincoln won the Republican nomination, was successfully reelected, and in an astute move that would both reward Chase as well as put an end to his presidential aspirations, Lincoln appointed Chase to the Supreme Court, where, if you remember from part 1 of this 2-part series, that is where Chase first began to make a name for himself as an abolitionist, defending fugitive slaves. The war ended the following year on the 9th of April, 1865, with the Union's triumph bringing a close to one of the most turbulent chapters in American history. But Lincoln's life was tragically cut short by an assassination just a week later. Lincoln would go on to be immortalized, Chase, for the most part, forgotten, even though he very much was a genius, a hero, and one of the few politicians in American history who served in both the highest levels of state government and all 3 branches of the federal government. Chase's remarkable financial acumen and Lincoln's decisive leadership intertwined in an unexpected alliance. Chase and Lincoln's story is a testament to the power of collaboration and the importance of putting aside personal differences for a higher cause. Even in the face of adversity and rivalry, great leaders can come together to achieve greatness. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Our next video is on an $8 trillion company that had the power to sign treaties, issue currencies, and even wage wars. It was called the Dutch East Indies Company, and it's also the origin of the stock market.